Night danger in the woods again. I'm actually in the ruins of a fort that me and some friends built when we were teenagers. There's very little of it left. Uh, it wasn't meant to be structurally sound, it was just meant to just be here for the sake of being here. But anyhow, uh, I'm here to talk about the cult of genre emulation and the detriment I think it has on a lot of modern game design. Seems like games today are narrow in focus, exceedingly narrow in focus. In this game, you are a group of kids who discover something sinister about their hometown, or you are special forces operators fighting antediluvian horrors on the fringes of civilization. And I think that this sort of prescriptive approach to player activity is it's harmful to the shelf life of a game. And I'm going to use two examples to kind of illustrate this. A negative example, which I hate to rag on Blades in the Dark again, but I'm going to because it's a game that I'm very familiar with, and I'm going to sing the praises of D&D again because it's a game I'm very familiar with. So, start with the good first, because we'll do the good, the bad, and then the ugly. The good would be D&D. Now, classic D&D, as anyone with a brain will tell you, is designed to emulate Appendix N fiction. But this is a bit of a deceitful turn of phrase because Appendix N fiction is not particularly unified in what its characters are doing. To keep this video from going on forever and providing an excessive litany of examples, we're going to look at just one Appendix N figure, Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian, who, in my opinion, is the highest possible vision of a human fighter, which is, of course, the best thing that a person playing D&D could play. Let's look at a couple different Robert E. Howard Conan stories and note what Conan is doing and what type of story is unfolding. In the first story, Phoenix on the Sword is a political intrigue. You have scheming nobles seeking to undermine their king. You have alliances and the movement of armies. You have heraldry and it's not about a plucky adventurer. It's about a king. It's about the machinations of the people who hate the king. You have assassination attempts and skullduggery and all of this you could do in D&D. On the other hand, you have a story like Beyond the Black River, which is a Western. You could adapt Beyond the Black River into a film and cast John Wayne as Conan, and it would work because you have a edge of civilization frontier territory with stockade forts and settlers and savage tribes in the wilderness abducting and killing these settlers. And yeah, it's a Western. But it's still a Conan story, and you could do that in D&D. In fact, I'd say that it's kind of the assumed starting point for D&D. Is you have a town on the edges of civilization, like a keep on the borderlands, and you have orcs in the hills and whatever. And you could do that. You can do that in D&D. Then you have what seems to be a lot of people's favorite Conan story, The Tower of the Elephant. The Tower of the Elephant is a heist story. It's Conan trying to sneak in and infiltrate this tower. He's got a buddy. They have to get past the guards and evade traps. And sure, there's a huge supernatural twist at the end, but at the core, it's still it's a thief story. It's a heist story, and you can do that in D&D. Last example, the Queen of the Black Coast. Queen of the Black Coast it's like Pirates of the Caribbean. You have a ship of pirates, and they venture off to some forgotten jungle to find lost treasures, and there's supernatural terrors besetting them. And once again, it's doable in D&D. You have a really wide range of player activity that could be accomplished. You want to do a game about pirates on the coast, plundering merchant ships and looking for lost treasure? You can use that with just the core D&D rules. You want to do a frontier game? You can do that with the core D&D rules. There is no genre, and I mean that in terms of like what the story's about. There's no genre prescriptions in D&D. There is a setting. There's genre trappings. It's always going to be a fantasy world if you run just the core D&D books. But what happens in that fantasy world is not all that aggressively prescribed to the players. There's incentives like XP for gold and rules for building dungeons, but if I'm being frank, dungeon crawling is probably the least interesting part of D&D, and it's the least interesting thing that players do in D&D. You provide them with a world, and they will do cool stuff. You don't need to build mechanical restrictions in the rules that ensure that the players are doing interesting and cool things. You give them abilities, you give them an advancement incentive, something as simple as gold, and they will make things happen. And they'll try to emulate their favorite books or movies. They'll do all of this without the game rules making them do it, if you have good players. My advice and my musings are not about bad players, because if they're bad players and they can't be made into good players, you just don't play with them. Black Lodge Games is correct. No games is better than bad games. So, let's look at the bad example. And I'm going to once again beat up on Blades in the Dark a little bit. Blades in the Dark has an extremely narrow focus of player activity. And Harper's very clear about this when you hear him talk about the design of the game. The city, you have a city, and it's a cool city. It's kind of gothic and spooky and haunted, and there's all sorts of cool things happening, and there's factions. But through the use of the crew playbook, the character sheet for the party, and what actions the game gives rules for, it's a very short list of things that you can do. There's only 12 skills or actions that a player can do in the game. They're always going to be a particular thing. It's always going to be crime fiction. It's always going to be, whether you're assassins or mercenaries or smugglers, it's going to be high stakes crime fiction. And it's always going to be in this particular space, because he even made it clear that he surrounded the city with this giant lightning fence and had the whole world outside the city blasted and haunted and unlivable to keep players from skipping town, because he wants a very particular type of story, a very particular type of player activity to occur within his game. It would take a lot of, I'm not going to say you couldn't, but it would take a lot of work to do a Blades in the Dark game using just the core rulebook about the Leviathan hunters. There's these in the world. There's these giant demon whales, and their blood is what provides electrical power to the whole city. And that's awesome. That's super cool. But the game is not built to let you do that. There's not without supplements, not without a whole bunch of extra rules. This narrow focus plagues most story games. It plagues Powered by the Apocalypse games. It's why there's so many of them, because anytime you want to do anything in a Powered by the Apocalypse system, or a Forged in the Dark system, you have to basically construct a whole new version of the rules to fit that very narrow focus of what is being accomplished. And this shortens the shelf life of the game. You can only do monster of the week or heist of the week for so long before you want to do something else. And so even when I was doing like 2.5 years of Blades, I wasn't really doing 2.5 years of Blades in the Dark. I played like 4 or 5 different versions of the rules, which all required their own rule book to accommodate. You need a whole separate rule book to do a detective game. You need a whole. They came out with a supplement for you to play cops or to play vigilantes because it's not accommodated by the core rules. And it's not that some universal or generic mechanical system is desirable. There's an Aristotelian, that's pretentious as hell, but in like an Aristotle ethics, there's a mean, and going too far in excess or too far in deficit is going to be a problem. Not enough player option and flexibility gives you something like Blades, the hyper-specific system that can only do one thing. But too much freedom, too much openness, it gives you GURPS, and one of two things will happen. Either you're going to front load a huge amount of work onto the DM to make a game possible, or you're in splatbook hell. Ironically, you're in the same problem that with a hyper-generic system that you have with a hyper-specific system. Hyper-specific system, you constantly need new versions of the rules to accommodate different activity. And if it's too generic, if there's not enough substance to go on, you need not mechanical supplements, but setting supplements. This is where GURPS Splatbook hell comes out. And when I think about games that have stood the test of time and that people really love and have rabid fan bases, these are games that have a really strong implied setting. They have a world that the players are operating in, but they don't have a lot of prescriptions on what the characters do in that world. GURPS lacks this, and so it has to provide setting splatbooks. But story games are too restrictive, too narrow in focus. And so they're only really good for one-shots and such. But a game like, whether that's AD&D, which will always, whatever kind of fantasy fiction you want to do, you can probably do it in D&D with a varying degree of success. And if it really doesn't thrill you, then Mithras / RuneQuest is going to basically fill in the rest of those gaps. You could do dozens of different types of games using Mithras or RuneQuest. Another good example is like Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk at first glance seems very focused, but even in the core rulebook, it's like you could be a team of trauma team paramedics. You could do cops. I did a really fun cops Cyberpunk game. We were Night City Vice, and it was a blast. You could do Cyberpunk Vietnam. You could do soldiers in some third world coup or war, civil war. You can do street gangs, and this seems to be what people tend to gravitate towards. You could do mercenary work, you could do journalism, you could do a game about a band, or you could do a game about corporate intrigue. All of these things are covered because it's a flexible game. Even Call of Cthulhu, which will always have the genre trapping of horror, the core rulebook has everything you need to do a group of teenagers investigating some terrible secret about their hometown, or Brendan Fraser's The Mummy with a motley crew of mismatched people in a strange land uncovering incredible secrets and kicking the hell out of them. Or the classic Lovecraftian academic librarians plumbing into knowledge that must not be known. There's a core conceit that is enough to remain consistent for the player so they know what to expect, but is flexible and allows this range of behavior. And I've been working away at a game for several years, kind of in the background. It's gone through a lot of permutations, and last night it hit me that I was falling into this trap of a very narrow focus. And it made me realize that I need to stop thinking so much about what the players are going to be doing, and I need to start thinking about where are they doing it? What is this second world that I am offering them? Because once you have the world, you have an environment for player behavior, and you need to leave room for the players to think up their own behaviors. I think this is probably why I agree so strongly with Macris in that simulation is the crust of the pizza. Game elements and story and all of this is awesome, and you can have different ratios of it, but you need to have a good base of world simulation, because that's what allows players to get invested and have agency. We're coming up on a little bit longer than I wanted to talk, and this is the most recent several takes, but I think I've broadly gotten my point across, and so I will simply bid you farewell, and until next time, this is Night Danger, your only Canadian friend, signing off from the forest.